church leaders. My name is Daniel Copeland. If we've never met before, I'm the director of research for Barna Group. Barna Group is a research firm based out of the United States of America that studies the intersection of faith and culture. Our mission is to create knowledge that navigates a changing world by understanding how are faith and culture relating to each other. What are the intersections and the key functionalities of these two distinct but very important parts of our society? And our goal is to equip church leaders just like yourselves to do what you do best, to lead churches, to make a difference in the lives of individual people. We want to come alongside you with data, with insights around, okay, what's going on in the world today? How are people doing? And what do they need from you? So that our goal is so that you don't have to be the expert. You don't have to know all the things. You can just continue to do what you do well by knowing what's going on. So I'm here to present a really, really wonderful study called The Connected Generation in Malaysia, Engaging Millennials in Leadership, Evangelism, and Social Justice. We did this research in partnership with World Vision Malaysia and Alpha Malaysia as an activity, a research activity in terms of how do we understand millennials today through these key distinctives of leadership, evangelism, and social justice. Today, in this first session, I want to talk to you about what did we learn around millennial leadership, models and opportunities for growth, mentoring, and development. Before I even get started, it's hard to even go on without mentioning the millennial generation is so excited to be leaders. They're no longer the tomorrow generation. They're the today generation. They make up the majority of the workforce around the globe, and they're excited to be leaders. And so we hope that this is a great database guide in terms of what are they looking for, who are they trying to be, and how can we support them. So I've got three main sections of data I want to talk with you about around leadership. First, hopes. What do they hope to be? Who do they hope to be? How do they want to be as leaders? Second, leading in the church. How do they see the church and who do they want to be there? And then finally, perceptions of pastors. Pastors are the key leaders of the church. And so it's important for us to recognize how do they perceive pastors such that pastors can become a great ally for them in their leadership journey. So first, millennials leadership hopes. Who do they hope to be? So the majority of millennials have high aspirations for leadership. When we ask them in this study, this is a representative study of Christian millennials in Malaysia, as well as other faith and no faith millennials. When we ask them, where do you consider yourself a leader? Half of Christians say, I'm a leader in my church and faith community. They also say I'm a leader in my job or workplace, in their family. What's fascinating is you see down here towards the bottom of our slide, 30% of no faith millennials say, I've never thought of myself as a leader. And another 6% say none of these. We saw very, very similar data to the Connected Generation several years ago, where there's this gap of leadership between Christians and people of no faith. A lot of millennials just can't name where they're a leader, although their aspirations are high. They want to be a leader in their church or faith community. They want to be a leader in their workforce and their family and other parts of society too. On the right side, what you see is where do you want to lead? And we see this incredible aspiration. The number one place that people want to lead is their job or workforce. That makes sense because it's where a lot of us spend the majority of our time. But it's important to recognize that this is a really key place where people are saying, I'd like to lead here. I'd like to make a difference here. And they're likely looking at church leaders like us saying, hey, can you help me? Can you help me figure out how to be this kind of leader? Only a few, less than 1 out of 10 Christians say, I don't want to be a leader anywhere. They say none of the above when we ask them, where do you want to lead? So recognize that that's maybe upwards of 9 out of 10 who do have somewhere that they want to lead, whether it's these different aspects of life or somewhere else. When we ask them, what kind of leader do you want to be in a very emotional sort of way? Christian millennials hope to be empathetic, relational, and collaborative leaders. So looking at the data here, we're looking at the difference between Christian millennials, other faith millennials, and no faith. And we're seeing what are the characteristics of leadership they'd like to embody. Well, first, they want to be empathetic leaders. Second, they want to be relational and collaborative leaders, open-minded. It's a really interesting person that they're kind of building. They're building this entirely very social leader, a leader who wants to be caring towards others, in community with others, and also open-minded. If you look down towards the right, these things that they're a little less interested in, They're less interested in being authoritative. They're maybe not as interested in being an authoritative, strong leader. They're not that interested in being entrepreneurial. We could look at this two different ways. From one hand, 28% say, I'd like to be an entrepreneurial leader. That's actually really high when we think about what does it mean to be an entrepreneur. But at the same time, maybe that's not the biggest trait that they're interested in. Tech savviness, we know that technology is always going to be important for this generation, but maybe it's not the thing that they're excited about when it comes to leadership. When it comes to leadership, they're thinking about socialness. They're thinking about empathy, relationships, how they relate to each other, how they treat each other well. So how can we, the question for us as church leaders, how can we embody these traits and build them up in millennials? How can we teach them how to be better, empathetic, relational, collaborative, and open-minded, inclusive leaders? Leading in the local church, how do they want to lead in our churches? How do they see the church when it comes to leadership? Well, first, we recognize that opportunities to lead youth ministry, music, and groups appeal to Christian millennials. They actually look at the church. What we see here is we ask them, in a church, would you be interested in leading in any of the following ways? And there's a lot of places that they'd like to lead. The number one place was worship. They would love to give their musical talents to the church. They'd love to lead in that way. They'd also love to pour into youth ministry. I think this is fascinating because for years we've been studying at Barna Group how the millennial generation is really excited about multi-generational relationships. They want people older than them to pour into them and to teach them. But what you're seeing here in the data is that 37% of Christian millennials in Malaysia, they want to pour into the next generation as well. They'd like to lead youth ministry. They'd like to look after the generations coming after them. And then next we see social concern. We know, and we'll talk about in a later session, how social justice ministry is something that young adults are so passionate about around the world. And that is another place, the number 3 place that they would like to lead in their church, whether that's service, care, aid to the community, somewhere that they can be involved in creating good change. The other thing that we see here in the data, you also see that we're looking at the difference between males and females, is that there are some distinctives. For example, the females are a little bit more interested in children's ministry, whereas males were a little bit more interested in youth ministry and also a little bit more interested in something like Bible study leader. So it's important to recognize that they're interested in leadership, they're interested in doing something in their church, and there might be different ways that they want to lead with even within their church. Why does this matter? It matters because the church is a foundation for formative experiences. When we ask young Christians in Malaysia, what experiences have you had at church? The number one thing they tell us is that I have learned what it feels like to be part of a team at my church. I'm given real chances to contribute, and I've been inspired to live generously based on the example of people at my church. Why does this matter? This matters because we have to recognize the role our church plays in the lives of young adults. It's not just a place for them to come and learn about faith and spirituality. That might be its core message, its core identity and mission, but the other things that they are learning along the way matter. 60% of them say, my church is what taught me how to be part of a team. That matters. That changes how they work, show up in their workplace. That changes how they show up in their families and their marriages. And so we have to recognize one of the roles we are playing is teaching them how to be a contributor to society. And 38% of them, that fourth number there, have said, I have had access to leadership training for ministry through my church. Leadership training for ministry, that's wonderful, but we also want to expand in such a way that they can see, I can be a leader here. This place will teach me how to be a leader. The thing that's a struggle about that is that only 1/3 of Christian millennials strongly agree their church is prioritizing leadership development. So 37% said, there are opportunities for me to lead at my church. 36% said my church prioritizes developing young leaders, young adults into leaders. 30% said I'm interested in being developed as a leader at my church. On one hand, this is great. 1 out of 3 say my church cares about developing leaders, but potentially that's 2 out of 3 who don't, and 2 out of 3 who don't see their church trying to develop young leaders. And that's a script we'd like to flip. That's something that we'd like to change because we want them to see us as a place that will teach them how to be leaders. Down towards the right, the other two stats that I want to call your attention to here are them saying, my pastor, priest, or church leader is a very credible source of insight on issues most important in my life. And then the second one was 28% issues in the world today. So there's a good percentage of millennials who say church leaders have something to teach me. They are sources of insight and truth. That's great. They see you that way, but let's also make sure that they see us as a place that will teach them how to do the things that they're passionate about better. So perceptions of pastors, we just talked about this a little bit. How do they see us as church leaders? How do they see the things that we have to offer? Well, first we ask them, what are the strengths of your church leader? The number one thing that they see church leaders as being strong at is preaching and teaching, knowledge in the scripture, counseling or pastoral care, and then mentoring younger leaders, 28% of them. This matters. We've seen this across the globe, that the thing that pastors are always known for is preaching and teaching. And that's wonderful. It's the thing that we, as church leaders, we're often called to. The thing that we'd really encourage us to notice here, though, is that only 28% say that my church leader is really talented at mentoring younger leaders. We want them to be able to see us as a church staff, as a church body who is willing to mentor them and build them up. So continue to be great preachers and teachers, continue to expand on your knowledge of the scripture and pour into that, but also recognize that we want them to see us as a place that can teach them how to be a great leader. We asked the same question of a moment ago. I showed you data on how do they want, what kind of leaders do they want to be? And then we asked them, what strengths do you look for in a church leader? Who do you want your church leader to be? And what's fascinating is it's the same things. They want to see their church leader as someone who is empathetic, relational, collaborative, open-minded, and inclusive. It's a very social person. It's someone who is open-minded and caring and social and collaborative and community-oriented. So recognize that they want to see in you the leader that they are desiring to be. I'm not telling you you've got to change. I'm not telling you that we have to change exactly how we lead. I'm telling you that they are seeing in you the things that they want to embody. And that matters. That matters because that means that there's something we have to offer them. But one of the things that we have to be very, very aware of is how they also see us as, see the world as the barriers in the world. So millennial Christians feel church leadership is held back by a preoccupied culture. So when we ask them, what barriers do you experience? What are the biggest challenges to leadership inside the church today? 75% of them, 3 out of 4, say everyone's too busy and distracted. Everyone is too preoccupied to be great leaders. They also then look at themselves and say younger Christians don't want to put in the time to become great leaders, or they see that the church is becoming fragmented in such a way that it's hard to lead if there's so many different pieces. So ask yourselves, how can we communicate that we are not too preoccupied to be great leaders and to develop great leaders? How can we overcome that stigma or that reality, whichever it may be? So I want to leave you with just a few thoughts. At Barna Group, we really believe we need to see the whole, take time to pray, think about what's next. So in response to this data, I would encourage you to see the whole. The aspiration for leadership is high. They want to be great leaders. But resilient leaders don't happen by accident. They're cultivated, they're formed, they're informed and developed. So don't let it be an accident if somebody becomes a good leader. Think about it, consider it, make a plan, make a strategy of how you're going to cultivate great leaders within your church and within your community. Then we're going to take time to pray. Pray for the millennial leadership aspirations are met with God's faithfulness, discerning mentors, and patience. If they're aspiring to be great leaders, we can pray that God's going to see that through. We're going to pray that they get great mentors and that they're patient around the leadership journey that they want to take. And then finally, think about what's next. How does your church respond? Listen first, then act. Out of data, it's always important to listen. Data is a great opportunity for empathy and to hear from people. So listen to this data, think about it, and then act, because how you act matters. It matters in the data. We see that the church is this great place for formation. So think it through and then make a plan. Thanks so much for listening to the section on data. I look forward to sharing more with you. Thanks.
Thank you so much for the overview of the leadership findings, Daniel. That was very insightful. Yes, it's so insightful, Daniel. We do have a few things to ask you about the data. I'm interested to know, based on the findings in Malaysia, do you think the millennial sentiment on leadership is similar around the world? What do you see as the distinct feature of Malaysian millennials in regards to leadership?
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. Thanks, Raymond. One of the things that I think is absolutely true about the millennial generation around the globe that we've seen time and time again is that they have such a high aspiration for leadership. They're really interested and passionate about being the leaders of the future, and they're looking for opportunities to do that. One of the things that's uniquely interesting about the Malaysian data is, unlike other countries we've studied at Barna Group, we've noticed that in Malaysia, especially Christians in Malaysia, they really do see the church as a place that they could be a leader. A lot of millennials around the globe don't feel that openness towards the church and maybe even have some pains towards the church, but there's this fascinating truly resilient group there in Malaysia who would love to be a leader at the church. Whether that's happening or not, we can't say in our data, and we know we've got some other findings around how they might be also perceiving the church, but it's really warming to see that there is this openness there in Malaysia.
Well, I think that's a very good point, that we all know that everyone want to be leader, and we all have the misconception that millennials may not want to be leaders, but I think they really want to be leader. So I like the data tells us that Christian millennial has a high aspiration to be leaders. That's what data showed us, right? So what else does it tell you beside that? And what do church leaders need to pay attention to? What would be some of the questions that church leaders can ask the millennials to understand the reason for the response in the data?
Yeah, well, I would say the number one thing that church leaders really need to pay attention to is recognizing their specific role in leadership development. That the church is not a passive bystander allowing leaders to be made somewhere else. Leaders don't happen by accident, and the church is, time and time again, what we see in research, the best leaders are people who come out of the church and people who have been formed in their church and who have had great mentorship in their church. And so I would encourage church leaders to stop, think a minute. Are we a good place that a millennial could find leadership development? Are we a place where they could become equipped? Because what we saw in the data is that about 1 out of 3 don't necessarily see the church that way. Or sorry, only about 1 in 3 see the church prioritizing that. So the questions they can be asking your millennials in your church are, well, what can we be doing? What are the barriers here? Do you feel like this is a safe place for you to be a leader? Where do you want to be leading? I feel like one of the things that churches do a lot is recognize they always feel like they have to do new things, start new programs, start new initiatives. And unfortunately, well, actually, fortunately, you don't have to do that with the millennial generation. They're ready to jump in. They're probably already leading somewhere in their life. And maybe it's just your job to come alongside them and say, hey, we see that you're trying to do things. We see you're trying to lead. How can we help you? How can we be the humble ones in this situation, in this leadership development, rather than asking the millennial to be the humble one, the one that's having to step up and say, please let me lead. I think there's an opportunity for us to reverse the script and say, hey, let's put you first. Where do you want to go? How can we serve you with what we know about leadership?
Wow, I really resonated with you on what you've mentioned right there. And this ties into my next question, similar to the stat that you have brought up. We see that in the findings, millennials are interested in a multi-generational relationship, and only 1/3 of them feel that church is prioritizing leadership development. If this opportunity is not present in church, where are millennials turning to? What can the church learn from in terms of equipping millennials?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's just important for us to recognize that statistic that only 1 in 3 Malaysian millennial Christians are saying that the church is a place that would prioritize my leadership development. That's a lot of room to grow. So when we think about, so if not the church, where are they turning? Well, they're going to turn somewhere. In David Kinnaman's book, Faith for Exiles, we read the line that just is very potent that says, screens disciple. Our devices are telling us who to be. So our work does the same thing. Our jobs disciple us. Our culture disciples us. And so if our church is not developing us into leaders, something is. And unfortunately, that might not be the leader that the world needs. Unfortunately, when our screens disciple us, we probably aren't becoming the person that the world and the church truly, truly needs. And so we have to recognize that if it's not happening in your church, it is happening somewhere. And it might not be happening the way that we would really want it to happen. It's probably not the kind of formation that the future church and the future world truly need. So how do we equip millennials? We come alongside them. We open up our doors and opportunities to say, you can be a leader here. We'll teach you what we know about leadership. We'll teach you what we know about utilizing your giftings for leadership. While we want our young adults to be in the world, we want them to experience the world, and we also want them to be a positive influence. And if they haven't learned that in the church, we have to be concerned about where they might be learning these things. So just continue to remember that all the things around us are discipling us in some way, whether it's a screen, our work, our culture, our friends. Let the church show up just as strong as those other things and develop our young adults into the leaders they're really supposed to be. Hi, everybody. I'm here back to share the next section of data with you on evangelism, continuing to understand what have we learned about the connected generation in Malaysia. So this section is going to go over several different findings that we've encountered around evangelism, millennials' perspectives of Christianity and faith sharing. What an incredibly important topic to understand. How do millennials perceive the church, perceive sharing their faith, and even how people outside of Christianity see faith, truth, goodness, and how can we as a church overcome barriers, be empathetic, listen, and then act. So I've got 5 sections of data I want to walk you through in terms of evangelism. First is the brand of Christianity. This is how do people actually think about Christianity? How do they see it? What do they know about it? Second, living and sharing faith. How are millennials today actually living out and sharing their faith? What do they think about that? And curiosity about faith, recognizing that everybody's got questions and it's okay to wrestle, but what curiosities are they having and how are they managing those in their life? Fourth, openness to the church. How are millennials feeling about the church? Are they excited by the church? Do they feel like the church is a place for them? And then finally, we're talking about knowing Jesus and finding truth. So this is the idea of what do they think of Jesus, but also how do they think about truth? And truth is a very big concept in this generation. So hopefully we can illuminate a little bit about what does it mean to find truth. So let's dig in. First, the brand of Christianity. What do they think of the church? What do they think of what the church is? So practicing Christians have the most positive perceptions of Christians, while non-Christians are mostly neutral. So we asked in our study, what is your opinion of Christians? Generally positive, generally negative. And what we see is that Christians themselves are the most positive towards Christians. So a practicing Christian, this is a millennial who is a Christian, they attend church and they believe that their faith is very important in their life. And we see that half of them are very, very positive towards Christians. Whereas non-practicing Christians, so there's Christians who are identify as a Christian, but they either don't attend church or they don't feel that their church is very important. They're a little less positive, but still mostly positive, just not as positive as people who attend every week. But what's really interesting down here at the bottom, you see that 48% of no faith millennials feel neutral. They feel okay about Christians. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a great thing either. But it's just important to recognize that the positivity towards Christianity is mostly coming from Christians themselves, whereas no faith millennials, they're most likely to be neutral. They don't have a negative perception though. And I actually think that's really important. A lot of times in the church, we can feel like people are negative towards us. That's not actually the reality. They're mostly neutral, having no opinion. Christian millennials are both willing to praise and critique the church. This is a really important concept. I just talked about that negativity. When we asked, how do you describe Christianity, or would you use any of these words to describe Christianity? What we see is that Christians tend to say that Christianity is a faith they respect. And a lot of other faith and no faith millennials say the same thing. They say it has good values and that it's friendly, that it consistently shows love for people. But they're also willing to critique the church, and they're willing to say the church might be judgmental. It might be hypocritical or out of touch with reality. Other faith and no faith millennials are also very likely to say the church teaches the same thing as other religions. So it's important to recognize that even though they might feel positively about Christians, they're willing to praise and critique. They're willing to see both sides of, I believe that this is a faith worth respecting, but I also have seen where it can be hypocritical. And that's okay. What we really want to recognize here is that they're wrestling, they're having questions, they're thinking through a lot of different aspects of the church. And we just need to be open to that. We can't deny any of these things. Whether judgment or hypocrisy has happened in your church, we don't know in this data. But we have to recognize that these are perceptions they have. Their perceptions matter, because if we don't address these things, they are going to feel even more distanced from us. Living and sharing faith. How are millennials actually talking about faith and hopefully living it out? So we asked millennials, how many times in the past year have you had conversations about your faith perspectives or beliefs with a close friend or family member of a different faith? So that being, how many times have you talked with somebody who believes something differently than you? The most notable number here, right here, is 48%. So half of millennials who are of no faith, that is that they are atheists, they are agnostic, or they say, I have no faith. Half of them have had no conversations in the last year with somebody about faith that believes something different than them. So to put that a different way, if you're not Christian, if you're not religious, you're likely not having conversations about religion. It's a bit of a foreign subject, and that's okay. That just means that we have to think about how we have these conversations differently. At the same time, you see that Christians are pretty likely to be sharing their faith. 36% said I did it once or twice. 23% said 3 to 5 times. And there's a lot of people who are empathetically sharing their faith a lot. And that's great. What we want to do, though, is recognize that outside of Christianity, outside of the walls of the church, with no faith young adults, it's just not that common of a conversation. But also the no faith and other faith young adults actually feel like it's wrong to evangelize. So we have this statement that we've used at Barna for a while that says it is wrong to share one's personal beliefs with someone of a different faith in hope that one day that they will share the same faith. So this is evangelism. And what you see is that the majority of no faith and other faith young adults agree this is wrong. They don't want to see this. Whereas the majority of Christians say, no, I disagree. Like that's not wrong. So why does this matter? It matters because the aspirations of someone converting is actually seen as a negative thing amongst people of other faiths and no faiths in Malaysia. That's okay. We're going to talk through why that might be and other ways that we can address this. But just recognize that it's a sticky subject. It's something that people are a little unsure of what to talk about, and they might not be even having those conversations. We did ask, though, of Christians, when you're telling others about your faith, what creates a positive or negative experience? What do you want to do? What is the positive things to do when talking about your faith? And what we see is that millennials want to share their faith with their actions and their story. So what you see there is 58% say it is very positive to let your actions speak rather than using words to explain your faith. Then they want to use a personal story, or they want to pray with a person. So what matters here is seeing that actions speak very loudly. And the millennials we've known this across the globe for several years now. The millennial generation really believes that actions, doing good things, that is the medium through which people can really share their faith and make Christianity known. On the negative side, so the things on the right side of the slide, what we see are negative things, negative ways to share this faith, share faith, is asking a person to give the reason for their lifestyle choices or beliefs. 16% say this is a very negative thing. So that's what 1 out of 6. And then 1 out of 10, 12% says quoting scripture or text as from the Bible as evidence for Christianity. We're going to talk a little bit about this in a minute, but millennials are very skeptical when it comes to asking people very direct questions and quoting people, trying to come off like they know best. They want to let their actions speak. They want to let what they do be the evidence for Christianity, rather than saying this is true and it should be believed. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about curiosity about faith. What questions do people really come with? So young Christians value opinions of their friends and religious leaders. So when we ask people, who do you turn to for questions about faith? Christians say, I turn to my friends whose faith I respect. I turn to religious authority. I read books. I might go to the internet. I might go to family members. But look at no faith teens here down to the bottom left. 30% of them say, I don't have questions about faith. 30% of them, so 48% of them say, I don't have conversations about it. And 30% of them say, I don't actually even have questions. That really makes a difference. That really matters. It just makes us recognize that they're not having conversations. They don't think they have questions. So how we might approach having conversations with them, how we might approach sharing faith should change. It should actually be a little different because they're not talking about it and they don't have questions about it. But when we ask them, imagine someone you would want to talk to about faith or spirituality, what would they be like? The number one thing is someone who listens without judgment, someone who does not force a conclusion, or someone who demonstrates interest in my story. All the way down towards the right, you see some of the largest beliefs in no faith is that people of no faith want to be able to draw their own conclusions and be aware of inconsistencies. So essentially, they want to be understood. This is something that we found in research time and time again at Barna Group, is that millennials and young adults of no faith, they're actually really interested in being understood, someone who will listen to them, someone who won't force a conclusion. And so we want to embody these traits. We want to allow our actions to speak, but we also want somebody to have the space to come to their own conclusions and feel interested in, feel like they are understood. What's their openness to the church? Where do they actually fall in terms of, are they open to the church? Millennial friendships may offer introductions to the church. This is really, really important. So when we asked if a Christian friend invited you to go to a church or online worship experience, would you go? The majority of Christians say yes, if someone invited me. But we also see that the majority of other faith and no faith young adults say probably, or in many of them saying definitely. Friendships are relationships, that empathetic, open-minded, collaborative leader we talked about earlier. That might be the big way to actually reach people. Friendships matter, relationships matter incredibly in this generation. And we should really think about that in terms of how do our actions speak as a way of inviting people to explore deeper. When we actually ask, what sort of things would you dig into? What we see here is that of non-Christians, which of the following would encourage or discourage you to explore more about Christianity? What we see is that special events in the church, over a meal, Christian movies and TVs, these are the sorts of things that they'd be interested in that would encourage them. Special events at church. So there might be things you can do in your church that will invite people. It's likely going to be through a friendship. It's likely going to be through a relationship they already have. And then meals and media really matter. These things are good. They're open. They're open to these conversations if the conversation is brought to them in a really good relational way. So let's close out this section on evangelism by talking about knowing Jesus and finding truth. These are some of my favorite stats of the study. So first, just who do non-Christians believe Jesus is? There are varied opinions about Jesus, and many outside Christianity still see Jesus as the Son of God. So in survey research, we always talk about how people often know the right answers on a survey. And what we're seeing here is that we have to recognize the fact that the person of Jesus, who Jesus is not actually that foreign of a concept to other faith and no faith young adults. Many of them will say, oh yes, Jesus was the Son of God. 41% of other faith, 32% of no faith. Some believe he's a prophet, a myth, a legend, historic figure. 20% of no faith say he's just a man. But it's important for us to recognize that only a minority say that they're not sure who Jesus was. Jesus is not that foreign of a concept. And that's okay. That's great, actually. Where they're starting is probably further along than you might think. But Christians and non-Christians alike struggle to define truth. They struggle to define what does it mean to have truth. So we ask them, please write your agreement on these following questions. It's okay to respectfully persuade someone to believe what you do. Christians say, sure, non-Christians are a little less likely. Truth is what you experience. I need factual evidence to support my beliefs. There's a lot of data here. There's a lot of ideas here. And what I actually really want you to focus on is the fact that, wow, there's a lot of different ideas about what does it mean to find truth. In today's day and age, everything out there is trying to tell young adults that this is true, that this brand is true, this movie is true, this way of life is true. And it's very complicated. And a lot of them are on a quest to try to understand, but what's the real truth? What does it mean to have truth? And it's a kind of messy subject. And so when we talk about religion and we talk about religious truth, it's just one other voice that's competing in their life saying, this is true. But what we really want to dig into here is hypocrisy and global conflict cause millennials to face spiritual doubts. So when we ask them, what causes you to doubt things of a spiritual dimension? So not just what causes you to doubt Christianity, but what causes you to doubt spirituality? The number one thing they say is the hypocrisy of religious people. Specifically Christians, 58% of them, over half, say it's how Christians act. It's the words and actions, so we talked about earlier, of Christians that make me doubt that there's something spiritual happening in the world. It's also conflict in the world. It's unanswered prayer. It's human suffering. It might be science. And so we really need to recognize that our actions as the church might cause people to doubt, and that might cause pain, that might cause hurt that millennials are experiencing towards the church. And we can't get away from that. We have to recognize that these might be the things that are hindering their journey into a deeper level of faith. So I want to close with just a few thoughts for you. How can we respond? So first, again, we can see the whole. Understand the times you lead in. Millennials are skeptical of hypocrisy and hope to impact the world through their action. They really, really want their actions to speak, but they're skeptical of hypocrisy. They're skeptical of their actions and their beliefs not lining up. And they're also skeptical of others' actions and beliefs not lining up. So as a leader, understand the times you're leading in. Understanding the issues that they're going through helps us lead them better. Next, take time to pray. So pray that non-Christians see the goodness of Christ, that Christ is doing good things in the world. Wisdom for millennials who do share their faith, and healing of any pains. If any of that data is true of a millennial in your congregation or a millennial in your community, someone who has seen that the church be hypocritical or see somebody be judgmental, we need to pray that those pains are healed and that they come to some sense of reconciliation with those things. And then finally, we think about what's next. Can your church be an authentic environment for Christians and non-Christians alike to wrestle through these complexities? Your church does not need to be the place that has all of the answers. And the millennials and congregants at your church don't need to be people who have all of the answers. But how can your church be an environment for wrestling, an environment for asking tough questions and digging deeper into the things we believe? Because what we saw about truth is this is really complicated, and it's okay that it's complicated, but millennials need a safe place to dig into those things and to think deeper with other people. So how can your church be a space for that? Thanks so much. I'm really excited to share this data with you and can't wait to get to our final section soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel, for the insightful sharing on evangelism. If I may point out, the data shows us that millennials of no faith prefer our action to speak louder than words, instead of forcing them to the conclusion of truth. I'm curious to find out what is informing or forming the culture of today in terms of good versus truth. How can we as Christians understand and respond to this culture?
Yeah, for years now at Barna Group, we've been studying this what we'd say that we've found time and time again is that young adults, young Christians around the globe are more interested in seeing Christianity as good than true. One of the things that we've kind of come to terms with is the fact that everything in our world is trying to tell us it is true. Whether that is social media is trying to tell us what is true, or the brands we buy, or the movies we see, like everything's trying to tell us it's true. And so for a young adult today, the church feels like just another thing trying to tell us it's true, this is right, this is correct. But what becomes inarguable for the next generation is what's good, what's actually promoting healthy living, what's promoting positive self-image and positive worldview, who's making a difference around the globe. And so when we think about this and we think about no faith millennials who are outside of any religious any religion, and they say, I don't want to be forced into a conclusion of truth. What they're saying is, hey, maybe I'm overwhelmed. There's a lot of things that are telling me what's true, and I'm maybe going to respond better to seeing what's good and what's being good for people. And so when we as the church keep telling people this is the truth, it just adds to the noise that no faith and even other faith young adults are feeling and hearing. So how can we respond? We can be really empathetic to that, and we can really listen to them and say, wow, we understand that you're being overwhelmed and that you're being constantly messaged to what's true in the world. And we can respond differently. We can let our actions show that there's something really good to Christianity, good for our well-being, for our mental health, good for others, for the causes that we get behind, and the ways that we promote each other in community. So respond by listening and then showing up in a way that is truly countercultural, because unfortunately in this day and age, saying something is true is not countercultural. That is the culture. The culture is for everything to be true and to argue about what the truth is. So to be countercultural is to display what's good for us, what's good for others in community and in the Christian faith.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Daniel, that sometimes when we as Christians, when we share the gospel, we never stand behind the shoes of the person receiving, because they get overwhelmed with all the truth and all the facts, and really, I think the key word is don't overwhelm your non-believer friends when you share your faith with them, So from my observation throughout the years, I'm aware that the majority of non-Christians really feel that it is wrong to evangelize. So can you tell us from the survey findings, what would be the best way to invite non-Christians to explore faith?
Yeah, and this is such a good question, because it's important to us as part of our Christian faith. We're encouraged to share our faith, but we've landed in a time where people feel like it's wrong to do so. In the United States, we found that half of millennials who practice their Christian faith feel like it's wrong to evangelize, and that it's wrong to hope that by sharing your faith, you'll convert somebody to Christianity. And what we've continued to learn is that this comes back to the good and true argument, but especially it comes back to people don't want to feel like their friends are projects. People don't want to feel like they're trying to sell something. One of the things I would, when I think about what can we do to encourage non-Christians, I would actually start by saying in the Malaysian data, what we saw was that 1 out of 3 of them say they have no questions about faith. They don't have any wonderings. And I think that's the right place to start, by recognizing they're not in a place that if they don't have questions, we can't have answers. We have to actually start by recognizing where they're at is very, very far away from changing their religious beliefs. One thing that we've learned here in the United States is that no faith millennials and Gen Z, actually the number one thing they want is to be understood. They want to be heard. They want to be seen. And that's how you take the first step. You take the first step by listening to them, leveling with them, having open conversations with them that's not about what's true, but more so, what do you believe? And putting that in a non-threatening way, putting that in a way that doesn't feel like anybody's right or wrong here. So start with empathy, start with understanding them, and then start to think about how are our actions informing their perceptions of the Christian faith. So you start with the empathy, move to good, and then down the road, we'll get to true. I think that one of the things that we've noticed time and time again in especially in America, but around the globe too, is that Christians have kind of lost their sense of patience. It's okay to be patient. It's okay for somebody to have a long journey coming to the Christian faith. And so if they don't have questions today, that's okay. It's okay to start with no questions and demonstrate, have good conversations, seek to understand them. And that will lead us on a journey in which we can have deeper and deeper conversations about faith that might end up in transforming their life, but it will also transform ours in the journey. Hi, everybody. I'm here to share our last section of data, our data on social justice, urgent needs, and how to respond to them according to millennials. Research has shown time and time again that younger generations are continually very interested in justice. They want to make a good difference in the world that lasts beyond their lifetime. So we hope that this data equips you to understand what do they care about and how do they care about it and how do we come alongside them. So I've got 4 sections I want to talk about. I want to talk about their top social concerns. What are they concerned about? What do they care about? What do we need to know? We're going to talk about individuals and impact. So how can individual people make a difference? We're going to talk about social media and impact. How can we be using media to create the change that we're interested in seeing? And then how can churches play a role? What can churches themselves be doing? So let's start by, what do they actually care about? What are they interested in putting their time towards? So when we ask young adults, what are the things that you're interested in changing? Or specifically, what are the top 5 issues facing the world's future? Here's what Christians told us. Mental well-being, political corruption, racism are the biggest, most pressing issues to the future. So what you see here is 47% say mental health. This is something incredibly important on the latter end of the COVID-19 pandemic that we're facing. That people have been alone, people have been without community, without others, and people are really concerned that mental health is going to be such a big problem into the future, that it is a justice issue. We're concerned about corruption. Corruption at its heart is the inability to create change because there's something wrong with the system itself. So young adults are concerned that the change that they want to see isn't actually possible. We're concerned about racism, about people being treated unfairly or discriminately based on things like race, wealth and income equality, global climate change, education, on and on. It's such a long list of things that people are very concerned about. It's not your role as a church leader to have the answer to all these things. It's your role as a church leader to understand what they're concerned about so that we can think about how to partner with them. Millennials want to make a difference, ideally through collective efforts. So when we ask them, how do you want to contribute? The number one thing that they agreed to was we need to look for collective action as well as individual action to make change happen. Then they say individual actions can help bring change, but it's not enough. What are we learning here? What we're learning here is that the collective, how we as a global body, as a church body, as a generation, we can make the difference, but one person on their own can't. All too often, the millennial generation has been told, if you're excited about something, go do it yourself. Go experience that on your own. But what they're really saying is, hey, we see things that we'd like to change in the world, and we'd like to do that together. We'd like to do that as a collective because we believe that's how we're going to make the difference that lasts a lifetime so that future generations aren't having to solve the same problems. If we do it together, we can make that difference. It can't just be on one individual person. At the same time, millennials hope for a wide-ranging response to injustice. So we asked them in our data, what role should the following play in addressing injustices? A major role or a minor role? And we could go through each of these items, but what I actually want you to notice is the fact that Millennials in Malaysia, specifically Christians we're looking at here, there's not one part of society that they believe does not have a role in addressing injustices. Basically, they say everybody has something to do here, whether it's government, media, representatives, schools, community, religious bodies. They want to see every part of our society involved in making a difference. There's nobody exempt. They really believe that this is the collective effort. All of these organizations, these institutions, all of them working together collectively to make a difference. That's really important. I think it's really key to who the character of the millennial generation, a very relational generation who's saying it can't just be on one person. It can't just be on one group of people. It's got to be on everybody to make a difference. So that in mind, let's talk about individuals and impact. What do they actually say one person can do such that we can come alongside them in that way? So recognize that many millennials have given their time and their resources. When we ask them just about the last year, what sort of things have you done in a justice and advocacy type of way? Half of them say, I've actually donated money to a Christian charity. 42% of them have donated to a local charity. 36% have volunteered. Several have signed a petition. If you look towards the middle-ish, 15% say none of the above. So only 15%, that's about 1 out of 6. So 1 out of 6 millennials say, I haven't done anything. Any of these options here in the last year. That's actually incredible. What that means is that there's only a minority who aren't involved in some way. And specifically, well, one level deeper, that means that the majority are. The majority are doing something, they are involved. This isn't a new thing, it's not a new initiative. This is something that they really care about and they really want to be a part of. So a lot of data in front of you. Let me break it down really quick. So when we ask them, how can individuals address injustice in the world and what things would be helpful to you? Christians see both prayer and action as avenues to address injustice. So on the left side, what are the top things that they say, this is what we can do as an individual? We can pray, we can advocate, we can learn about the sources of injustice, we can help people grow in their faith. All very local, individualized things. They're not saying I can do everything. They're saying I can pray, I can advocate, I can learn, I can help people grow. And then on the right, what do they need? Well, they actually want to see people around them step up as leaders. They want to see their generation grow in their leadership, which we talked about earlier, to be able to address the things that that they want to see changed in the world. They also need more opportunities to volunteer. They're looking for things to get involved with. They want to know how to start their own initiatives. That's part of the collective effort. They want to know, what can I do? How can I get things started? So when we say that individuals have a role, this is the role that they want to play. They want to be prayerful. They want to advocate. They want to learn. They want to step up as leaders. And maybe these are the ways that on the individual level, with the people right in front of us in our churches, that we can equip them and we can learn from them and we can come alongside them and offer them our expertise in leadership and in prayer around and learning the sources of injustice. You don't have to have it all figured out, but maybe these are helpful guides for where you can start. So what about social media? This generation is a very, very social media, internet-prone generation. How can social media play a role? How can social media be part of change? So first, it's just important for us to recognize that digital media is central to young adults receiving information. We just asked a simple question of, where do you get the information about the issues that matter most to you? And what we see is that it's all online. Christians say social media, online news, online articles, television, searching online, everything's online. So if everything's online, and if I said a minute ago that every part of society has got a role to play in addressing injustices, then online is going to be part of that. It's where they get their information, and where they get their information is likely how they come to know about what's going on in the world, the injustices that they want to impact. So when we ask them, okay, so what can social media do to address injustices in the world? The number one thing they say is that social media is a tool for awareness. It's how we get the word out. It's how we use the way we use it is to share information. It doesn't actually create change on its own, though. So number one response across what we're seeing here is the language groups of people who took the survey. So people said, by sharing content that makes people more aware of injustices, by equipping people to take justice, by joining awareness campaigns. If you look at the very bottom here, the things that they say probably don't actually make a difference are expressing grief or sorrow, posting, or changing profile pictures. So they're kind of saying to us, there's actually not much you can do to make a difference on social media. Social media is about sharing. It's about awareness. It's about growing the collective effort. It's not about making the difference there in that space. So final section here, what can we as churches do to make a difference? So most Christians believe the church is making a difference, but some feel this more than others. So what you're seeing here is of Christians, our different language groups, answer the question, do you feel like the Christian church is taking adequate effort in addressing social injustice or social justice in Malaysia? And what we see is that most Christians say yes. Most Christians said definitely or probably the church is making an adequate effort. But our Bahasa Melayu and Mandarin groups are a lot more likely to say definitely than our English-speaking groups. So there's some diversity of thought within here, but the majority actually do say, yes, I think the church is taking an adequate effort. So what can churches themselves do? What we ask them, what can Malaysian churches and Christian leaders do to address social justice? The number one thing they say is creating relationships with people who are experiencing injustice by praying for those, by providing relief aid. Top 3 responses. So Christians see the church as a place that is going to make relationships, prayer, and create relief aid. I actually think that's a great trio of ideas that we can walk away from, very, very actionable. So what can we do? We can create relationships. We can actually get close to people who are experiencing injustice. We never want to be so far away, because if we're far away from the people who are experiencing injustice, we probably don't understand what they're going through. And we probably can't relate, but we probably can't come up with the solutions that are really going to help them. The further we are from the problem, the further we are from the solution. So we can create the relationships. Then we can pray. What else should that's one of the greatest things the church can offer the world. We can pray for those people. And as church leaders, we can lead our next generation, our younger adults, in how to pray, how to meet people in that way. And then third, we can provide relief aid during crisis. When things go wrong, we can actually show up. We aren't silent bystanders. We're actually providing aid. Just to point out, what is the least likely things? What are the things that millennials were less likely to say we should do? Helping people become Christians and posting about injustices on social media. So they don't believe that evangelism is a way to solve injustice. And they also don't believe that social media is one way to solve injustice either. They really want to see the church make those relationships, pray, and provide aid when the time comes. So let me close this out by saying, how can we respond? So first, we can see the whole. How are we going to do that? Millennials are already making a difference with their resources and desire the church as a trusted ally. So you don't need to come up with new things. You don't need to come up with new programs or new ways for millennials to get involved in justice. They already are. They're making a difference, and they want you to be their ally. So come alongside them. Take the time to figure out, what are they already passionate about? What are they already doing, such that you're their ally in the change that they're already trying to make. Then we can pray. So we're going to pray for a generation that passionately desires to make a positive impact, that they don't go unseen or unaccepted. So the millennial generation really cares about making a difference, and they really care about making the right difference. So one way we can support them is we can pray that their desires to make that impact isn't unseen, that it isn't unaccepted, that it is seen and accepted in the world. And then finally, think about what's next. Just try to answer the question, is your church equipped to support and encourage the enthusiasm millennials feel towards change? Can we be a place that is a safe and brave place for them to feel supported and encouraged in the ways that they want to make a difference? I think that this is an incredible calling for the church, just to say, hey, we might not need to have all the answers. We don't need to have all the answers, but we can support and encourage them. They're enthusiastic, and we can come alongside them. Thanks so much for letting me share this data. I look forward to seeing what you all do from the findings. Thanks.
Wow, again, those are good stuff, Daniel. I too find it very informative about millennials wanting to look for collective effort as well as individual action to make things happen or to make change. As far as we know, churches in Malaysia are at different stages in terms of involvement in social justice, or some might not involve at all. All right. So if I may ask for your opinion, Daniel, why should church leaders care for social justice?
Yeah, it's a really, really important question. If we think just even theologically for a second, justice is the act of reconciling all things to God. And that is something that excites Christian millennials, but even for all millennials, it's something that they're excited about. It's something that they're passionate about. And just like a parent would never turn away from what their child is passionate about, the church shouldn't be turning away from what the millennials are passionate about, because what they're passionate about is good. There's nothing wrong with what they're passionate about. It's good for others, it's good for themselves, it's good for the world. And so let's get excited about what they're excited about and offer them what we have to offer, a foundation in theology, a foundation in the church and in community that can really change the world in the ways that they're excited to. So why should churches get started? It's got good purpose behind it, and they're already doing it. They're so excited, and we should come alongside them.
That's interesting, Daniel. I truly agree that we as a church should participate in the excitement that is already there among millennials. And on the topic of collective action, millennials indicate that they want to make a difference, ideally through collective means. Would you like to elaborate on the idea of collective efforts? What do you think about collective efforts outside of the church?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would actually say that this is one of my favorite findings from this millennial study, the clearness in the data that the Malaysian millennials, and specifically Christians, recognize the fact that individual effort is not enough to make the difference that they're excited about. All too often in the millennial generation, we've kind of been told, do it yourself. What you're excited about, go do that thing, go be passionate. But they're so aspirational about the things that they want to change that they've kind of come back and said, we can't do it on our own. We need something bigger. We need something stronger. And so they're participating in justice. They're participating in advocacy and in making a difference, the difference they really believe needs to happen in the world. And so how should we make sense of collective effort? We should see it as an incredibly encouraging thing, that they want to see other people come alongside them because they truly believe that a difference can be made if we do these things together, that if we really bond together as a church and as organizations, as partnerships, that we can make the difference that the world needs to experience. And what a great testament it's going to be if the church comes alongside that and is part of the collective effort. So these millennials are out there, they're making the relationships, they're doing the things, and they want us, the church, to be part of that collective effort, because that collective effort is what's going to make the difference, not just today, but for all generations to come. If it's just something individual, the likelihood is that it's going to fade away, that it's not going to be the changes that they're excited about, that they're pushing for, might not stand the test of time. But if it's something collective, it has such a better opportunity to do that. And so that's what we have to offer them. We have to offer them a community, a collective that can actually make the changes that they're excited about and they're passionate about.
Yes, I think I totally agree with you, Daniel. So if the churches want to involve in social injustice issues like overcoming poverty, not just feeding the poor, about income equality or climate change or pollution, how should the conversation start with the church leaders and the millennials?
Yeah, I would say that, again, I said something similar earlier in our discussion. Churches don't have to start new things. There is so much going on. We think about the collective effort. The collective effort is about what's already happening. So recognize first, millennials are excited about this. They're passionate about change. They're out doing things. In the data, we saw that it is a very, very small minority of millennials who are not engaged in any sort of justice advocacy, whether that is just giving money or their time. It's the majority of them who are involved. And so in that way, we can first start as church leaders by slowing down and saying, okay, what are the millennials around us already doing? And what could we start supporting rather than what could we start new? there are so many great organizations in the world, organizations like the ones part of this event, who are making differences, who are doing good work. And millennials want to partner with them, and they want to see the church involved. So don't feel like you've got to do something new. You don't need to start a new program. Sometimes that's part of the individual change. When one church says we're going to do this one thing, you might be able to impact some people, and that can be really, really good. But when we partner, when we become part of the collective effort, we can do a lot more for the long term. So don't feel like you've got to do new things. Don't feel like it's all on you either. I think that's another clear thing that as church leaders we fall into. We believe it's all on us to figure it out. Because millennials want to do something in justice, now we have to make a justice program. No, that's not how it needs to go. You can be part of the collective effort too. You can say, oh, what are other churches doing? What are other organizations doing that we can join into? Join the collective effort. Don't put it all on yourself as a church leader to figure out. Trust them, trust their passion, and trust what you've got to offer them in terms of leadership development, in terms of connections within the community. Recognize that your resources might not, your great resource is just the relationship and the ability to be part of that collective effort. And I think you can have make a really meaningful difference when you see that.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us the findings of the survey and giving us so much input.
Yes, and we also want to appreciate the team from Barna for putting such a powerful report together for us, church leaders, so that we can use to raise and even engage the millennials for leadership, evangelism, and social impact.
Thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you for letting the Barna team be part of this wonderful research journey. As always, our goal at Barna is to create knowledge that navigates the changing world. And we hope that this empowers you and equips you as church leaders to go make the difference that you're meant to make. Go fulfill your callings with a little bit of new resources and new understanding underneath you on how we can partner with and enter into relationship with the next generation so that future generations get to meet a healthy and thriving Christian church that's known for the great things that it's doing in the world. So thanks so much for inviting me to be a part of this. The Barna team is so encouraged by what you all are doing in Malaysia and can't wait to continue to watch and be a part of the difference you're making. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Daniel, and amen to what you have said.
Amen.
I hope this evening has given you some very meaningful insights about the voices of millennials in Malaysia. We've come to the end of this session. I'll pass the time back to Eunice and Raymond.